Hello, welcome to Examining Media, Representation, Identity, and Community. We are so happy that you're joining us. We've got some people kind of coming in, so we're going to give everybody a second to settle. But as you do enter, please share your name and where you're based in the chat. We'd love to get to know who's joining us. My name is Joya. I work with the education department here at the Pulitzer Center. I'm also joined by two amazing educators. I'd love to ask you to just unmute yourself and share your name and where you're based. Let's start with Miss Nikki.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Nakisha Gilliam, and I am in Los Angeles, California.
Thanks for joining us, Nikki. We also have Mr. J.
Hello, everyone. I am Jairus Hellums, just call me Jay, and I'm based here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Wonderful. So let's see who is joining us in the chat. I'm also joined by my colleague, Hannah. Hannah, let us know who is joining us in the chat box.
Well, so far I'm seeing Gerald from Evanston, Illinois. Hello, Gerald. Anne in Philadelphia. Great to see you folks here. Allison in New York. Wonderful. Keep letting us know your name and where you're based in the chat so we can connect with you. We've got Vicki in Indianapolis and Lisa in Brooklyn.
Well, welcome to all of you, and thanks so much for joining us and sharing where you're based. So I'd love to read our agenda for today. We're going to begin our webinar by exploring the Pulitzer Center's mission, resources, and fellowship program. And then we're going to listen to Ms. Nikysha and Mr. J, and they're going to talk about their units that they crafted during their time with us as fellows. And of course, we'll dedicate a little bit of time to answer any of your questions that you have throughout the presentation. Finally, we'll close with a brief survey for you to complete when the webinar window closes. Now, I know many of you are familiar with Zoom, but I do want to explain the technical components of this particular experience. So you'll notice that your microphones are off and your videos are off, but there are going to be ways for you to engage. You can always share your reflections and your thoughts in the chat throughout the conversation, and we encourage you to do that. If you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box. You don't need to wait until the very end to ask your questions. You can type them in at any point, at any time that they arise, and we'll be collecting them there. We'll just answer them at that final section of our time together. By the end of this conversation, we want you to walk away having achieved these 4 goals. We want you to be able to explore Pulitzer Center's mission, education, and educational programs. We also want you to explore units crafted by Pulitzer teaching fellows that connect with themes of identity, community, and representation. We would also like for you to examine how teaching fellows employ media literacy skills to connect to world issues. And finally, we want you to explore Pulitzer Center reporting that investigates themes of identity, community, and representation in global and local contexts. Now, the Pulitzer Center is a journalism organization. We are dedicated to spreading awareness of underreported global issues. An underreported global issue or an underreported news story refers to a news story that isn't getting the attention that it deserves. We support, or we spread awareness about underreported global issues by partnering with journalists who investigate these stories across the world. We provide funding for their reporting projects, and they publish their stories in a range of publications. Here are just some of the issues that journalists investigate with the grants that we provide. You may notice an issue that resonates with you or also resonates with an instructional goal that you have in your classroom. I'd be so curious to know what that is. If you feel comfortable, share it in the chat. We'd love to get to know what you explore in your classrooms or what you gravitate towards. Once journalists publish their stories, our work doesn't end. We continue conversations around these pressing issues by producing public events and by working with educators from kindergarten through 12th grade to the university level, and ensuring that they have access to reporting and resources that help students and teachers connect with these stories. Now, the Pulitzer Center's education department is driven to cultivate a more curious, informed, and empathetic and engaged public by connecting students and teachers with underreported global news stories and the journalists who cover them. We implement this mission by providing a range of programs and resources to educators and students. We republish every article produced by our journalist grantees on our website without a paywall. You can explore our library of unreported news stories on our website. To support engagement with unreported articles, we are always publishing lesson plans on our lesson builder. Our standards aligned lesson plans approach news engagement in a variety of ways. Lesson plans can explore specific articles, engage with global themes, challenge students to use critical thinking or media literacy skills, or even support experimenting with reporting skills like photography or interviewing. One of our greatest resources is our connection to talented and passionate journalists. You can invite journalists to speak with your students virtually. Journalists have discussed the articles they've produced, their experience as a journalist, or honed in on a journalism skill like writing, photography, or interviewing skills. We also have workshops for students and teachers. Our workshops for students really center around our seasonal writing contests. Our spring writing contest, for example, Fighting Words, is active now. Students can respond to any Pulitzer Center article with poetry and submit their poems to the Pulitzer Center for consideration. Other workshops include professional development opportunities for teachers and our webinar learning experiences for teachers and students. This common sense study highlights the importance of exposing students to news. Students say they feel more knowledgeable and prepared to take action in their communities when they follow the news. Still, there are some barriers for students, feelings of sadness, anger, or fear, and not seeing their voices and experiences represented in the news. These feelings are precisely why we work with talented educators, because your role in making news accessible to students is integral to their growing relationship with news and news consumption. In our efforts to deepen our work with educators and students, the Pulitzer Center launched a teacher fellowship in 2020. Teachers connected to global journalists and crafted short units that leverage news articles and exploring larger themes. One track explored the role that the media played in our collective experiences in the face of COVID-19, and the other track explored both art and journalism as tools for examining justice or injustice. Here is just an image of our incredible cohort representing a range of states and learning communities from the elementary to high school level. Today, we are going to hear from two of our fellows. They will be presenting their units and sharing some information about their experiences in the fellowship. We are going to start with Nakisha Gilliam. Nakisha Gilliam is a native of Pontiac, Michigan, a graduate of the University of Michigan with a degree in English and an MA in Educational Administration from California State University, Northridge. Gilliam is a former Fulbright Fellow and a current doctoral student at LMU in Los Angeles, California. She has been teaching for 23 years and this year teaches 9th and 10th grade English and English language development. She makes her home in Los Angeles with her husband and two grown-ish children. So please join me in the chat in welcoming Miss Gilliam. Hi, Miss Gilliam, you're actually on mute.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much again for being here. It really is an honor to have a moment just to share my experience with you. And so, let's go back to the beginning here. So my task or my pleasure is just to kind of share some of my experience in participating in the fellowship and thoughts behind the unit that I created. And so the unit title is Identity in the Time of COVID, and you can find it on the Pulitzer Center's website. And so in the beginning, I was incredibly excited to be accepted into the fellowship. Enjoyed having the speakers come and listening to all of their experiences and finding out about the wealth of resources that the Pulitzer Center had to offer. Particularly because, when I think of Pulitzer, I think of the Pulitzer Prize, and not necessarily all the other things that they have to offer teachers in terms of lessons and things like that. So that part was great. And then came the part where they said, okay, so now you have to build this unit. And initially I was like, okay, I do this. This is what I do. Then not a problem. But then came the layers of requirements. So using Pulitzer resources, underreported stories, focusing on media misinformation and the pandemic. And then, much like my Bitmoji here, I started to feel overwhelmed at the thought. And I wasn't sure about the direction that I wanted to go. Anybody who knows me will tell you that there are a million ideas swirling around in my head at any given moment, on any given day. And so then I started to feel anxious. And I actually sent a message to Farid, who was our cohort leader, and kind of shared some of my anxiety with him. And he was very reassuring, very calming, and kind of gave me some words of comfort and some direction. And I am eternally grateful for that. One of the things that I typically do, particularly when I started teaching middle school, is begin the school year focused on identity. And I do that because I feel like there are such great influences and huge influences on students. And it's very easy if they are not sure of who they are, or, um, kind of where they belong, or even begin to have that sense, to kind of gravitate towards different paths that may end up um, with have them go in a direction that's undesirable, and I'll leave it at that. So having said that, we begin, like I said, each unit with each year with identity, and this is just an example of what my students had to say about identity at the very beginning, at the start of the year. And so the idea for me of not only creating a unit, but also teaching that unit in the in the same year as the school year was already underway, for me was like decorating a moving train. Like, how am I going to get this done? Well, it just so happened that the class that I chose to focus on for this project, I also teach them in an English class. And in the English class, we were reading Metamorphosis, Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis. And one of the things that I had them do in that class was consider this time of isolation um, as a time of being in their own personal cocoon, and thinking about how they have changed while they have been at home, being sheltering in place at home, being safer at home. One of the other things that I thought about as I was preparing this unit, or thinking about preparing this unit, was the year 2020 as a whole, and just how it was marked by racism and violence and protests, and sometimes the feeling of helplessness and feelings of being overwhelmed. And what came, and I'm really grateful for it, was an opportunity to explore underreported stories that were curated by the Pulitzer Center and archived there for us to use at our disposal. The story that I latched on was one of this gentleman, and his name is Jose Montez. He lives in the San Francisco area in the Mission District. And I latched onto his story for a number of reasons. One, he talks about being alone in the pandemic. And he talks about how he misses the things that he used to do, but also the fact that his home is in Central America, and he misses his family there. He doesn't have an opportunity to go back home. And I thought that the students that I currently teach, my English language learners, would also be able to find connection in this story, because they too often talk about, missing family members back in Central America, back in Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. And so I decided to put the two things together, wondering if the outbreak of violence and the outbreak of racism was caused by outside forces. Was it caused by the isolation that people were feeling, or was it something that was within us that was amplified because we were being isolated? And so that is how identity in the time of COVID-19 came to be. As we read the article about Jose Montez and him being alone and missing his conversations and things like that, I challenged my students to think about neighbors that they had who might also be feeling isolated and feeling alone. Maybe they can't see their family. Maybe they don't have access to technology where they can FaceTime or they can Zoom. And how life-changing would it be? How wonderful would it be to know that someone else was thinking about them? And so the challenge was for my students, and I apologize if I get misty about this, the challenge was to have my students write a letter to a neighbor and then also reflect on that process. So what was it like for them to write to the neighbor? And what did they learn from that experience as well? So in addition to the article about Jose Montez, we found another article sort of to make us think about this time of pandemic. So everybody has a story. Everybody's experiencing this global pandemic, but some people may be experiencing it in a different way. Everybody has a story to tell, but how will they remember it? And so that was also an additional challenge for us. How are we going to remember this time? And so to mark that, I also had my students write a letter to their to their younger selves, although they were only a few months younger. So this letter was written, I think, about October of last year. And so they're writing to themselves at the beginning of the pandemic. So writing to themselves in March with words of wisdom, words of encouragement, words of advice. There were so many resources also available at the Pulitzer Center. And what I wanted to do, knowing that I had different reading abilities in my English language development class, is choose articles that would be accessible for everyone. So not only did I use articles, but I also used photo essays. We did jigsaws so that students worked in groups via Zoom. So they worked in groups in breakout rooms and went through the articles, read through them, went through the photo essays, and then came back to this Padlet to share their ideas and thoughts. And we used this as a reference moving forward. Some of the other articles that we found were related to identity. We found those elsewhere, but had to do with personality and identity and how COVID-19 could in fact impact those things. The blessing of the pandemic was that we were able to have guest speakers Zoom into our classrooms. So we had a professor come from Loyola Marymount University. He's the director of my doctoral program. He came and spoke about personality and identity. And then Zawadi Morris, founder and publisher and editor of the BK Reader, came as a resource from the Pulitzer Center, and she also came and talked to my students about how the BK Reader came to be, the inspiration behind it. She shared some very personal stories about jumping out of her car and speaking to a homeless gentleman on the street and asked him to help her recruit some other individuals that she wanted to speak to for a story that she was publishing. So when the speakers came, my students, it wasn't just going to be like a sit and get. So they had what you'll see here, a note-taking guide. There were specific questions that I had for them, and then notes that they were taking from the presentation, and then questions that they still had. And then down below, they could reflect. And I did the same thing for when Zawadi Morris came to the class. And I really liked what this student said in her reflection was the fact that she knows and notices that there are a lot of people who are affected by COVID-19, and particularly a lot of homeless people who might be affected. But Miss Morris uses her career to help these people in the margins be heard, people that we may not think about be heard. So again, those underreported stories, making sure those stories are heard and known. And so as final projects, my students had opportunity to either reflect inward and share their own personal journey in terms of identity and the time of COVID, or they could interview friends and family members. And I think many of them chose to interview friends and family members because they were struck by the notion of sharing underreported stories, and then also because of Zawadi Morris's visit to our class. I think many of them were inspired to do that. This particular student chose to turn inward, and she reflected on how she realizes that her life has changed, and that she didn't necessarily know who she was, but that this time of isolation, this time of quarantine, has really helped her do some reflecting and determining who she wants to be. Right. So she said that she felt desperate because she didn't feel comfortable not knowing herself, but she's working on it. Okay. Some of the other final projects, like I said, they focused outward, focused on friends or family members and even neighbors. And this particular student here turned to a neighbor, a 71-year-old grandmother who's from Central America. And one of the questions that he asked was advice on how to manage day to day during this pandemic. And she said, surround yourself or share with people that are surrounding you in the best way possible. Organize a schedule, keep exercising, and find positive ways to be distracted. This particular student really, to say that she surprised me, I don't know what kind of connotation that sends, but I feel like she went over and above. So not only did she interview friends and family, she shared some research about COVID-19 and how it was impacting the world. She talked to friends and family who were in Colombia, who were in Argentina, and it really caused me to think about how I viewed my students, just in general terms, right? Sometimes we have a tendency to think of our students as, these folks who come in and it's our job to teach them and pour into them, but they have such a wealth of knowledge that they come with. And part of me feels like I'm preaching to the choir, but even their capabilities and their perspectives, right? Especially because I have students who come from all over the world, and so they bring those perspectives with them. Was really incredible to see, and was marvelous. So this is one of the last ones that I want to share. This particular student not only did personal reflection, where she talked about her life was affected, and this is not her, but how her life was personally affected by the pandemic, because she herself um, contracted the virus and missed about 2 or 3 weeks of school, and was very afraid. But she also spoke to friends and family. She spoke about, she interviewed a family member who was pregnant and had to deliver alone because her husband was not allowed to be in the hospital with her because of the pandemic, because of the virus. There was another doctor. We hear a lot about frontline workers and how they're working hard to save the lives of others, but we don't often hear about their own personal lives, the things that they have to go through. And so this particular doctor, um, her family and neighbors were afraid that she was going to bring the virus home. So she had to sleep, in the community hospital, in the rooms that were nearby. So just those kinds of stories that we don't hear about, I was really grateful for. And this unit continues to have an impact on my classroom. There are students who um, continue to explore stories about changing identity. Every month, my English learners have an assignment where they do a current event, so what's happening in the news, and they have to report that back to the classroom. And so very often I'll see students bring back stories such as this one. So loneliness makes our brains crave people. So this was an article, some reporting that was done, and a student chose to bring this back, right? And they continue to search for those underreported stories. And last and certainly not least, I'm definitely grateful to have participated in this fellowship, just not only in terms of because of the resources that are available, but because of the thought that I was challenged to go through to develop the unit, and really have my students work to be reflective and seek out those stories that need to be told and haven't. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Nikki. Please join me in the chat in thanking Miss Nikki for this incredible presentation. I also want to share some positive words from the chat. Elizabeth says, identity is such a cool way to start the year from any grade. Selena says, it's a great connection for students. Courtney says, love this activity because there's still time right now to do it. I think she was referring to the letter writing activity. Please continue to share your thoughts in the chat. I'm actually going to share Nikki's unit in the chat for all of you. You can take a look at that. I'm also sharing all of the units that are in the media and misinformation and pandemic set, so you can look at all of the units that were crafted by our fellows in that cohort. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to transition to our next incredible speaker, Jairus Hellums. Let's take a second for this to adjust. So Jairus Hellums teaches 8th grade language arts in the Metro Atlanta area. He received a Bachelor of Arts in English from Winthrop University and a Master of Divinity from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. His areas of interest lay at the intersection of justice, pedagogy, theology, and critical theory. Today, Jay is going to talk about his unit plan, reframing the gaze, incorporating joy into our truth telling. And so I am going to pass this off to Mr. Jay. You have the floor, and please join me in the chat in welcoming him.
Hello, everybody. How are you? All right. So I know all of us are so used to Zoom and everything. Can you all hear me? I just want to be sure. Wonderful. All right. Well, again, my name is Jairus Hellums. That's the name my mama gave me. Most people call me Jay. So you can go ahead and call me Jay. It's all good. Let me thank Joya and Hannah and Fareed and the Pulitzer Center for just being cool and awesome people, and inviting me along with Nikki to do this. God must see me very highly to allow me to be up here with Nikki, because she is just awesome. So, and y'all have already seen the evidence of that. So hopefully I don't mess up too much. All right. So I'm going to kind of do everything in reverse. All right. Nikki was focused heavily on her unit up front. I'm going to save mine for the end, and I'm going to kind of come at this from a 30,000 point of view, 30,000 foot view, focusing on my experience with Pulitzer Center broadly, then the fellowship, and then the bulk of my time on the unit. And if you have any questions or anything, of course, you have the question option in the chat and whatever. So let's go ahead and get it. All right. All right. So the Pulitzer Center. So what drew me initially? Okay. So as has already been mentioned, the Pulitzer Center has so many resources. And the thing for me is, as a language arts teacher, I like to be able to have multiple bases, multiple areas of resources for my students. So we know Common Lit, we know New ZLA, we have others out there, but the Pulitzer offered something that was very unique. And it allowed for some nuanced lessons, knowing that there are specific areas that maybe Common Lit or New ZLA or any of these other outlets have. And so that has been a blessing for me and my students, because then I can pull specific stories and ideas about racial justice, about environmentalism that I may not be able to find elsewhere. And the second thing that drew me to the Pulitzer Center, especially for the education aspect, the education arm, was the opportunity to connect with like-minded educators. One thing about me, if you know me well, is that I like to be around people who are passionate and who think. I have very low tolerance and very little patience for a lot of folks who just don't want to think or who don't want to dig deep into some of the ideas, especially when it comes to education. My philosophy is, when you're dealing with human life, you have to be willing to dig in. And so having other educators who are just as passionate and ready to get, go hard in the paint for the sake of their students, that means something. I always want to be around those folks. As I focus on this particular unit within the arts, justice, and journalism cohort, there are a few things that I wanted to achieve, trying to be open, but still some things based off of the description of the cohort itself, that I thought, okay, let me see if I can get this done, however ambitious it seems, within this unit or within this time that I have with the cohort. So I wanted to find another way to use literacy to amplify the significance and power of justice. I wanted to provide educators with another angle to approach justice-related cultural relevant teaching, because I know that those are always buzzwords, but I actually want to not just throw out the lingo, but actually have something worthwhile to say about it because of the work that I've been doing with it. And lastly, I wanted to bring another perspective on cultivating the heart. So the humanities value is appraised at its true value and is not diminished by unjust ideas rooted in perverted ideologies. I know that was deep, but my mindset behind that is my students are human beings, they're not objects. And so dealing with this aspect of underreported stories in journalism, those stories that we don't commonly hear about, I wanted my students to be able to see the fullness of humanity everywhere. So I wanted them to observe the fullness of humanity, but also to respect the fullness of their humanity and of those who are around them. And I'll definitely flesh that out in just a little bit when I get to my unit. So like I said, I know me, you'll probably figure out very quickly, like I'm a deep thinker, and sometimes I like to stay in the deep. So these things may have seemed ambitious, but this is just where my particular mindset is. All right, so the fellowship itself, and I want to focus on a particular aspect of the fellowship, and that is the benefits of the community itself. And so for those of you who may be interested in cohort, for those of you who were the cohort, who were in my cohort, because I saw Courtney and some other names pop up, for those of you who are in the upcoming cohort, just here are some things just to be thinking about. Again, it's a community of passionate educators This isn't just another PD, because I know all of us love professional development, right? We all do. But this one, this is totally not it. And my mindset is for a person to apply for this particular sort of opportunity, it shows their dedication. So it lets you know automatically that they're not here to play. They're actually here on their own time to really dig into this aspect of education and how to really engage their students with what's going on in the world. And these are the greatest people. I will say that I feel like I had the best cohort. And Nikisha can say what she wants, but I think mine was mine was the best, because again, I had some passionate folks across the country. Beyond that, they gave feedback. I think Nikisha mentioned that or alluded to this aspect of they provided some solid, good feedback throughout the process of me building out the unit. Because going into this, I didn't have necessarily an idea about what I wanted to do. I had some things kind of in my head, but I really didn't know what my unit was going to be about. But through conversations with my folks in small groups in the breakout rooms, or offline conversations that I had with some of my folks, it just really provided me with some great things to think about. So it wasn't the standard, oh, that was good. No, it really was some good, solid feedback. Have you thought about this, or what's going on in Georgia that makes you think that maybe your kids need to look at this from this particular way? Or here, I'm in New York, or I'm in DC, or I'm in LA, or in Laredo, Texas. Here's what's going on here. Maybe your students can approach it from this way. So with that, that kind of allowed me to again stay in my head a little bit, to really figure out how to make this a more full, holistic unit. And lastly, and I think this is more just I'm just again going back to the first point of having culturally relevant pedagogical conversations. I know that's a mouthful, but again, having passionate teachers who are dedicated to culturally relevant teaching, knowing that they want to use these global stories, these Pulitzer resources that they are delving into at the moment in time where we were, but then try to really figure out how are we going to get our kids engaged in this. And so for me, like I said, just being able to be in those conversations, to listen to these ideas, actually like nerd out and geek out a little bit, just because again, a PD is boring, you're half asleep. But in this particular setting, it allows you to kind of wake up so that at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night when we would meet, it didn't feel like it was 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, on the East Coast, at least that's the time. So just to kind of give you some insight into, just in case you're thinking about it, or you were there, or you're headed into it soon, so you have something to look forward to. All right, now let's move forward to the unit itself. Reframing the gaze, incorporating joy into our truth telling. So yeah, so joy, this idea of joy kind of has always been in my life. You saw my bio a little bit, so like I'm coming from a theological, more of a spiritual background, but I always try to figure out how to really allow joy to spill out into the classroom, for it to come up in the classroom. But at the same time, I want my kids to be able to see and pay attention to what's going on outside of the classroom as well. So it was after our very first cohort meeting, and Melissa Bunny Elion, who was one of the photojournalists and one of the reporters for the Pulitzer Center, who did an awesome presentation about Afropunk. And at first I was like, Afropunk, really? Black people don't do that. But what she did was she really allowed, she told these stories about her in South Africa and places in the United States, about justice movements that are going on, but really highlighting the joy in particular communities in the midst of the particular struggles, the particular suffering, the injustices that were taking place or may have been spawned not too soon before. And so that idea of joy in the midst of suffering stuck with me. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I take this idea of focusing on joy and connect it to kind of the overall idea of what my cohort was about, the focus that was there for me. And so I came up with this idea of kind of reframing the gaze, kind of rethinking about the gaze. So let me talk through a little bit to let you know where my mind is. And if you have questions for me, I know I may have some later, but here we go. So this is a conversation-based unit that seeks to teach students to reframe and renew their gaze, so that in reporting on truth, they do not focus only on the dark side of it, but allow the light of underreported stories of joy to shine forth. All right, so students will focus on identifying, analyzing, evaluating, creating stories that often go underreported, and those stories of joy. In the process, they will be able to see the multidimensional aspects of truth, encompassing the beautiful, the joyful, and those stories that we typically see presented. Assessing the fullness of truth with a renewed gaze will enable justice work to be authentic, minority life experiences to be represented more fully, and reporting to have a new standard by which to operate. So let me break that down and translate that. You translate it. So my mindset is this: truth is more than just what we see on the news. A lot of times the reporters that we hear, we report the truth. Yes, but a lot of times that truth looks very dark. It looks very negative, looks very violent. And so my mind was, isn't the joyful, those smiling faces, those good times, isn't that just as truthful as the negative or the violent? And so with that in mind, I wanted to approach my students with this idea of, how do we get a full look at truth, so that it's not just, oh yeah, the shooting, yes, that's the truth. Yeah, but the joy that's going on in the community outside of that particular event or that particular thing that may have been going on. Not to negate what's the negative, but sometimes when we focus so much on the negative, it can weigh in the traumatic, and it can really impact us. All right, so that was the initial lens. But then moving beyond that, I said, so what's going to impact how we see, or how we start to report these stories? And that was me to kind of rethink or reframe the gaze by which we are operating. And so this goes into a more maybe philosophical, maybe more spiritual side, but I don't shy away from that in my particular classroom. I don't think we should. And so really trying to put students in the mindset of, okay, so how do we shift? What is it about our biases? What is it that keeping us from seeing the fullness of truth, the fullness of this particular experience in this particular community? And with that, we end off in this aspect of, I wonder, with a renewed mindset and a new understanding of truth, maybe we could start seeing the joy and reporting on the joy in these communities. Not this superficial sort of joy that we kind of hear because it's a buzzword and people want to jump on it, but really truly trying to root the reporting that we do and the livelihoods that we see really in this. Yeah, there are some bad things going on, but there are definitely some joyful experiences that are protruding even through that. All right, so that is how I framed it. So therefore, my design for my 5-day, kind of my 5-session learning segment unit broke down. 2 days was for truth, 2 days was for the gaze, and then, or 1 day was for the gaze, and then 2 days were for joy. And I know that sounds ridiculous. You packed all that in a week. Yeah, because I kind of had to, wink, wink. But I'm hoping to build this out a little bit more, because even I recognize that it was a lot. And I did not want to take away from the depth that I was trying to get at. But at the same time, I realized that because it was a bit much at times for my students, because I was having them think, because that's just what I do. So this is kind of the overview. after each learning day, and you can see the lessons on the Pulitzer site, so I'm not going to go through each day. But after each day, there were reflections for them, much similar to what Nikysha had. But after each day, after the lesson was given and the text that we had focused on was given, there was a reflection. You'll see the reflection journals as well on the site. And so each day for 5 days, students were reflecting upon whatever it was that particular day was, on truth, on the gaze, on joy. But the sixth, or kind of the performance task, where I really wanted my students to flesh out, or really express what they've learned. They had an opportunity to choose from 3 different ideas. Like one, they can use photography as a medium. So kind of using Melissa Bunny Ellion's kind of layout, her structure, and really trying to look at their particular neighborhoods in the Snellville, Lilburn, Loganville area in the suburbs of Atlanta, really see kind of joy in struggle, right? And so some of them wrote, and I couldn't share all of them. I couldn't, but I do. If you want to, converse on the side, I can try to finagle it for you to be able to see what I have. But some of them really tapped into this joy through photography. There was an opportunity to create a space for joy to be reported. So they interviewed, number 2, interviewed those about what joy means to them in the midst of injustice. So I remember one student interviewed his grandmother, who was in the civil rights movement and very active here in Atlanta, probably a no name, but she was kind of listening to her seemed like she had a resume. She could have been there with King, doing all her stuff, but hearing him kind of tell the story about how she kind of lit up during certain parts, even though she was talking about something bad, she still lit up kind of laughing at something that seemed so minute, so small, but it kept her going in the midst of all the stuff that was going on in the 50s and 60s in Atlanta. And so that particular interview, he could be able to look back on and see, okay, so there was joy in the midst of what she perceived or she saw and what she experienced as injustice. And the last one is kind of one I want to look at a little bit more, and that's writing a poem or song in response to a local national story of injustice. And so I added this one in there just because I know my cohort was the arts, justice, and journalism. And so I really wanted students to be able to express themselves in some artistic format. And so surprisingly, a lot of them took this route. I don't know if it was because it was the easiest. To me, it would be the most difficult. But here are 3 of the poem/songs. The one in the center, Rashawn said it was a song. And I'm gonna push him to actually do something with it. But here are just 3 of the things, the poems, the words that they use to express themselves in response to some of the injustice that I saw in Georgia, and then more broadly, you see here with George Floyd. So just to kind of take a second to take this in. And I know for the sake of time, I'll keep moving. I think some of these are on the website as well. I think they're on the student work. I can't remember. But if not, you can reach out to me and I can share these. I know I have permission to share for sure. Okay, so let's keep moving because I know my time is getting short. There are a few things. I just kind of did a quick word splash. The blue, there are 4 big ideas that stood out for me. So these are my teacher reactions and thoughts throughout. The green is my students and their words back to me. So I'll start with them because they're more important at this point. So this unit was revealing, deep reaching. That was the phrase, and I wanted to keep their phrase, deep reaching, engaging, and reflective. Those are words that came back to me. I will say this, in my particular context, we kind of stick to a pacing guide, we stick to particular lessons. lesson styles. And so in order for me to do this, I kind of had to deviate from that. Don't tell nobody. I had to deviate from that. But I felt like there was a benefit to it because I still had them reading, particularly the 63106 St. Louis series that Pulitzer has. So that particular series I used a lot. Afropunk, again, by Melissa Funny Elion, for sure. I still had them reading. I still had them writing with their reflection journals and with their performance tasks. But more so, I wanted to converse because I was in a concurrent model. I had students in the building and I had students in Zoom at the same time. So trying to really get them to converse about what was going on allowed, it to be more engaging. And so if I could do that more often, and I try to do this as much as I can, but for them to kind of come back and say, it allowed us to kind of think through some things and see some things differently. I was like, okay, cool. Then that's where I was headed. For me, it was freeing just to be kind of break out of what I typically have to do on a regular basis. Again, don't nobody tell nobody. It was challenging for me because I had to try to condense some big ideas and translate them into something that my students could work with. And that's something I'm still working with and still trying to maneuver, and how do I polish this so that it can be usable on a broader scale. And it was reflective for me. And so even in the time of preparing for this, it allowed me to kind of reflect through what I could do differently. One thing I will say, if you, look at this unit and say, I want to try this, and I'll be humbled if you actually did, but be mindful of the digital virtual environment. I want to try to teach this again another year when we get out of this to see what kind of difference that makes. Because I think that would make a difference just because of the nature of the unit itself. But for what it was in this particular environment, I tried to make it work. But I will say I want to try that just to see what the difference will be. And on that note, I'm a hush because I think I went past my time.
No, Jay, thank you so much for your incredible presentation. We have so many amazing comments in the chat. I wanted my students to see the fullness of humanity everywhere. That is really resonating with me. Questions about how your students define joy, we'll get to that. Stacy James shared deviation is good sometimes, especially when it allows students to be more reflective about themselves and the world in which they live. Thanks for teaching such powerful lessons to your students. So thank you so much, attendees, for your comments. And thank you, Jay, for your incredible presentation. We're going to transition to questions. I think we have time for 2 or 3. I'm going to ask my colleague Hannah to share the first question with our panelists.
Sure, folks, I'll pop on screen. Thank you so much for sharing some of that genius with us. You're owning your students. And thank you, Nikki, for being really on it with these questions. You've been answering a bunch of them in the Q&A already. But Selena had a great question that was originally for Nikki, and I think would be great to hear from both of you on this. Selena asked, what is one thing you learned about yourself after you developed your unit? Did it change your perspective or your thoughts about your students? So maybe we could start with you, Nikki, and hear from you as well, Jay.
Yeah, so but I'll try to remember what I shared in my response. But I think what I learned about myself, and I said this a little bit when I was presenting the unit, is that, I always talked about how I say that, my students' stories matter and my students' voices matter. But this particular unit really showed me that they are able and willing to use their voices to speak for those who maybe can't speak for themselves. I also shared that, I have the same group of students again this semester, and I'm sad because I think I won't have them next year. I've had them twice now, last year and this year. And I am really excited to see what else they will do. They have I feel like they have flourished. And I know that sometimes people think about, the distance learning and the disservice that it's doing to certain populations of students. But I'll step out on a limb and say that there are actually some students who have been flourishing during this time because they are more comfortable, in their own little cocoons, right? The idea of being out in front of other people causes all kinds of anxiety. But to get back to the question, just um, it's changed me because it has forced me, and it continues to force me to see my students as more than empty vessels that need to be filled. Like they have capital and they have agency that they come with and that they can use not only for themselves, but for other people.
See, that was all deep and stuff. Let me think. So I think much like Nikki, one thing that I have been more mindful of in this year, especially going through this unit, is the and I'm gonna sound like a broken record, the humanity of my students, right? And really learning how to honor that. I will say, and this will get me in trouble, I know for sure, but I'm used to it, that, sometimes we focus a lot on the skill, on the standard, right, when we're teaching. And that's where we're told that this is what they need and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, yes and no. But I feel like in decentering the standard from this particular unit, moving that to the side and putting their humanity in the center, allow them to be able to see themselves within the unit, and allow me to be able to engage them more easily. Because I know sometimes it's a struggle trying to get them engaged when I have to focus on, okay, we have to determine the central idea. Or, we need to be able to see how this central idea develops throughout the text. All that is important. But again, how do we really try to engage students? And so for me, this allowed me to kind of see that sometimes, and I just read it now from Stacy, sometimes you have to deviate for the sake of, right? And allowing myself to be able to do that. I think that's the part for me, allowing myself to do what I need to do, and not worry about, okay, no, I got to get back to the pacing. I got to get back to this. I got to get back to this. No, right now their humanity is at stake. And I need to be able to tap into that and allow them to tap into it too.
Thank you both so much. And I'm seeing some resonance in the chat here, which I hope you're seeing too. A lot of agreement, and thanks for the reminders of needing to leverage students' experiences. Maybe an interesting follow-on to this question of decentering the standard comes from Courtney. Courtney's asking, what grading or assessment protocols were used to push student progress, and especially with diverse learners? Question for either or both of you.
So I have to be honest, I think this part was the part that I struggled with the most. And um, it did, but I think ultimately I did go back and look at what um, the standard was. So in this final project, what kinds of things was I expecting the students to be able to do, or was I asking the students to do, and to what degree were they able to do it? And so I think looking at the expectations and then the degree which to which they were able to accomplish it was helpful for me.
Yeah, for me too. The assessment part was the most difficult part for me. It was. And I know we're always taught to begin with the end in mind, all that good stuff. But I felt like this was so different that I think, if anything, using their reflection journals that I gave them and their performance tasks to really kind of see, okay, one, were you paying attention? But two, how I could be able to see if they could comprehend what was going on. And for the most part, they got what was going on from day to day. And that was kind of the first check that I wasn't over their heads. And, you know, at least I was with them. It also allowed me to see that, you know, if I had more time, maybe I could really, you know, really flesh out some things and go back. If this were a normal sort of unit, I could go back and say, okay, I need to reteach this based off of what I saw or I read, especially when it came to this aspect of the gaze, just because I feel like that needed more time for me. And that was just a personal thing. Because I think my students understood this aspect of bias and trying to, you know, look at their own biases and be mindful that some of the media, you know, they have their own biases as well. And so we have to check ours just like we want them to check theirs for the sake of the stories that are being told. But I think, you know, and mind you, these are 13 and 14-year-olds. So I get that too, that they're still having to learn and having to grow and understand some things. But at least for me, the reflections allowed me to kind of see where they were. I didn't have necessarily a rubric. I tried writing a rubric and then I gave myself a headache trying to figure out how to write one for this, because I don't think it really fits. It doesn't work. But if someone out there sees something different, by all means, please let a brother know, and we can make it happen.
Well, thank you so much for your responses. As we transition to our conclusion, I just want to, there's been so many amazing comments in the chat, but I want to transition with a comment from Peter LaRose, who says, thank you, Jay. You remind me of the quote from Maya Angelou: we need joy as we need air. We need love as we need water. We need each other as we need the earth we share. So thank you for that reflection, Peter. Right. So I have shared these pages with all of you in the chat as it loads, but you are welcome to explore these units and the units of all of our fellows on our website, and you can find those links in the chat if you scroll up. And opportunities for all teachers and students are still available. We have our annual Fighting Words Poetry Contest that we are launching right now and that you can participate in. This is an opportunity for students to respond to reporting with poetry, and our workshop materials are available. So we're gonna throw that in the chat. We're gonna throw a link to the chat. You can conduct the workshop on your own. The materials are available for you, or you can ask a staff member from the Pulitzer Center to conduct the workshop for you if you're looking for a guest. And we encourage you to have your students try this really exciting writing contest and opportunity. Another opportunity that we have all year round for free is our virtual visit program. If you'd like to have a journalist come visit your students, you can do that by contacting us at the Pulitzer Center. And we are always excited to collaborate with you. You can reach out to us at any time. We're always looking to connect with educators that are doing incredible work with students. And I'd like to close by saying, let's take a moment to celebrate these incredible educators. They are supporting their students in innovative and transformative ways. Thank you for your rigorous units and your thoughtful reflections today. We are celebrating you. And thank you to this incredible community that's here with us today, attendees who have persevered during a really challenging year. We appreciate you, and we are here to support you. Thank you so much. Have a lovely week, lovely weekend, and be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.